Well, the topic, as you have seen on the slides, is government-driven urbanization and its impact on regional economic growth in China. Actually, this is a paper I co-wrote with colleagues from Harbin Institute of Technology, some colleagues from School of Management there. And we are lucky to have this paper published, and it got the ESI top 1% quoted paper that year. So we are lucky. I don't know what is really special about this paper, but I think maybe the terminology we use here, government-driven, really hit some important topic which scholars are interested into. Well, and also I'll share with you about some of the original motivation of conducting such a research. Because we noticed that various levels of government in China, they likes urbanization. The governors they like to talk about urbanization. They like to use the term urbanization in their policy making, and also they have gave a lot of political orders and new policies to various level of their administration. So to be more accurate, they love the high ratio of urbanization, and they seem to feel ashamed if the urbanization of their administration goes lower. So they are proud of having a very high urbanization rate, and they will feel ashamed the other way. So correspondingly, they have done a lot to make this urbanization rate higher. So as a researcher, we would wonder why. Why do they have such an interest? Why are they so willing to improve the level of urbanization? How does it important? In what way? And what kind of consequences does such an intervention make on local development? So that's basically the motivation of conducting such a research. Well, our today I will report to you according to a structure of a normal paper presentation. So it's first of all introduction, then theoretical background, then the method data, and then main findings, and then conclusion and policy implications. So it's a normal structure of presentation. Okay. So the key word is urbanization here. So urbanization is something we're familiar about. So it's a worldwide phenomenon, a very important dynamic index of human society worldwide. As the famous economist Stiglitz once said, the two great leading issues in the 21st century is high-tech and urbanization. So urbanization is so important. And here at least some figures for you to grasp the whole image, the general landscape of urbanization in the world. So the world's urban population has increased from about 746 million in 1950 to more than 4 billion in 2020. So more than half of the world's population lived in cities already in 2013. And in 2018, the figure is 56%. So basically we can define the world we are living in is, well, somehow an urban world because more people are living in cities. And the trend is there will be more and more people moving into cities. And it is generally higher, the ratio of urbanization is generally higher in the developed world, developed countries, than in the developing countries. So, for example, in the year 2020, the urbanization rate in developed countries is about 80%. I think Japan is one of them. And the figure is 51% in developing countries. So we will wonder by noticing this figure, for example, the urbanization level of the globe in 2022, why some places have higher urbanization rate and why some places have lower rate, and what are the consequences, what are the driving forces of such a comprehensive changing process. Well, then let's have a look at urbanization in Asia and China. Well, in contrast to the average level of the global urbanization, Asia manifests an even more rapid speed. So it's even faster than the world average, from about 17.5% in 1950 to 50% in 2018. And the United Nations have made projections that it will reach about 66% by 2050. Of course, many developing countries in Asia, like Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and China as well, have contributed a lot to the average urbanization rate of Asia. And for the same period, we can see China's urbanization rate has changed with even greater extent, from 18% in 1978 to 60% in 2018. So that's the situation of Asia and some Asian countries. Well, on the other hand, I think we are well informed. We have witnessed a very high growth rate of China in the past 4 decades as well, since the 1980s, when the opening and reform policy started in China. And also that's the situation of Asia as well. So in general, in the past 4 decades, the average growth rate is very high. And in comparison, China is very much outstanding by 9.43% annual GDP growth rate. So although Asia in general is already very high, but China is way higher than its Asian neighbors. So this will make us wonder, by seeing the very fast growth of urbanization in China, and on the other hand, the very fast growth of GDP in China. So are they related? Do they have any connections? And if so, how do they connect? So as a researcher, that's something we are wondering about. Well, by reviewing past research, we will find out that previous studies have well explored how urbanization can put impact on urban economic growth. Actually, it's not a new topic. It has been there for more than 2 decades. So, for instance, Frank Hauser early in 1998 have shown us that rural-urban migrants tend to be more educated than those who do not migrate. So therefore, he can conclude that urbanization actually creates a higher level of human capital, which is positive to economic growth. So his research actually already show us one mechanism how urbanization can positively trigger the growth of localities. Another pioneer research finding is that urbanization creates agglomeration in urban areas. So it brings actually higher density. That's the main difference between urban and rural, right? So higher density can trigger spillover effects, and firms, enterprises can make use of that. So localized economy of scale is another important mechanism how urbanization can positively affect economic growth. And more than that, many other research have studied the relations between urbanization rate and GDP per capita, for example. And many research have proved that positive effects exist between urbanization and GDP per capita. So these are some matured research findings already there. And well, on the other hand, we can see a lot of interesting practices with related to urbanization in China. Because of these positive effects we have mentioned, which has been found in past research, so Chinese policymakers are very much active in actively boosting a higher speed of urbanization. Actually, urbanization has been a very important formal national strategy. So you can find it various places in our important policy documents. So urbanization becomes a fundamental goal of various levels of government. And such a goal is as important as other goals we are familiar with. For example, the economic growth rate, the new job opportunities, or the quality of social welfare. So urbanization rate is something as important as those fundamental issues I've mentioned. So this doesn't happen very common in other parts of the world. So that's some unique feature of Chinese policies about urbanization. And also on local level, provincial level government and the municipal level governments, they all set quantitative, very specific goals regarding urbanization rate. For example, here we have listed some quantitative goal of 6 provinces in China in their latest 5-year plan. I guess you must have known the 5-year plan in China, which is a very fundamental local policy for economic and social development. So in such an important document, the urbanization rate, a quantitative goal, has been written in such an important policy. So we can see from this figure already, urbanization in China indeed is something different, something, well, not fully regarded as a natural process, but something the government has to intervene and do something. They have invented various policy tools to affect, to influence such a process, urbanization process. So about these figures, here we see, for example, Sichuan 60%, Henan 63%, Shandong 65%. You might not have any ideas about what these figures mean, but let me share with you a simple math is the growth rate of urbanization of these provinces made, and also on the state level on average, it's about 1% increase every year. So 1% increase of urbanization rate each year. So what does this mean? It means about 14 million new urban residents annually in China. So that's a lot. 14 million. So that's more or less the same amount of population of many European countries. So every year we're creating the size of population of many European countries. So that's quite a challenge for the society and also the government, because which means they have to provide a lot of new spaces for these people to be accommodated, and also they need to create 14 million new job opportunities. Otherwise, it will be a chaotic situation. So that's also why every year we have very ambitious GDP growth rate, because this will solve the problem of those 14 million new urban residents. Okay, but anyway, still, I think personally that's a lot. Every year, 14 million new urban residents. That's a lot. That's too ambitious. That's need a lot of support in terms of economy and a lot of other dimensions as well. So a lot of questions will follow up. So is the city able to grow that fast? For example, is it possible for the cities to grow that fast? And can such a trend maintain itself for a long time? And does urban area need that much new labors? So on the one hand, we see people are flooding into cities, but on the other hand, do the cities need that many new labors? Can they absorb them? And more in-depth question would be, is urbanization a natural process, or it is an institutional tool that decision makers can manipulate to some extent? They can play with it, like monetary and financial tools. So these questions are important and have leave a lot of doubts there. I think this research tries to correspond to one or more of those questions. Nevertheless, it's clear that in China, urbanization have a multiple level, partially driven by market and partially driven by the government policies. That's something for sure. So that's why in this paper, we're focusing on what we call government-driven urbanization, because that's indeed something on the one hand different from other countries, but on the other hand, it has manifested how urbanization has been regarded today here in China, and also it can inform to policymakers, not only for China, but also for some other Asian countries as well, where urbanization happened. Okay. Well, I would like to share with you about some contextual information. Hopefully these contextual information can help you to better understand the unique story of China. Well, when we talk about urbanization in China, it's always important and necessary to talk about the hukou system, because it's a unique institution of China. Actually, hukou is a system of household registration in China. a household registration record officially identifies a person, including name, parents, spouse, and so on. And also, government issues a rural hukou or urban hukou. We see two categories here already, right? Rural hukou and urban hukou. To persons by their location of origin and assign more benefits. So hukou links to social benefits, such as educational resources, healthcare resources, and to urban residents than rural residents. So hukou is an important factor blocking rural-urban migration because it's really difficult to change the status. So hukou is a threshold for residents to whether they're qualified to get urban welfare. And it has been used in many other ways to distinguish different groups of people when some resources are really in shortage. For example, an interesting thing here in China is in Beijing, for example, when the real estate market, for example, has booming in the past decade, that the local government tried to cooling down the housing market by a regulation on real estate purchase. And one tool they're using is this hukou. So they set a regulation that people with local Beijing household registration, they have the qualification to buy 2 houses. For those people who don't have Beijing hukou but have been living in Beijing for more than 5 years and you work here, then you are allowed to buy 1 house. And for the others who on the one hand doesn't have a hukou registration in Beijing, on the other hand they don't work here, then they don't have the access to local real estate market. So it's very weird. It sounds weird for a foreigner, but by sharing this information, actually, I want you to better understand such a contextual information that how hukou in China has been linking to various kind of social welfare. And also more information about the land tenure system in China, because this is also very important background information why local governors are so eager to have a higher level of urbanization. So we have this what we call the public ownership of land in general. And there are 2 types of this public ownership. One type is what we call state-owned urban land, and the other type is collectively owned rural land. So these 2 types of public ownership. And on the left side of this figure, we see the state-owned urban land can be transferred to land developers by either planned distribution or market distribution. And it depends on what kind of functions are going to be used. So if it is, for example, the land for a residential product, it's profit making, so the land developers have to obtain the land from the land market. It's an open, competitive market. And if it is something for public, non-profit, for example, a piece of land for a primary school, then it will be distributed through a planned system. So this is the story on the left side. So state-owned land can be transferred in these 2 ways. And on the right side is about collectively owned rural land. First of all, this type of ownership can be transformed into the state-owned urban land by a process which we call land expropriation. But the other way around is not possible. So state-owned land to rural, as a collectively owned land is not possible. So it's a one-way transition. And a second point is we see a lot of these gray arrows, so which means rural land cannot be used freely. It cannot be transferred into land developers. So this is the only way it can go. First of all, it's been transformed into state-owned land, then it can be further used and developed by the market actors. So from this figure, I want you to know is that in China, the land supply, land sales has been monopolized by local government. So that's the key information about land tenure in China. Okay, this will help us to understand why the local government are so enthusiastic of making a larger urban population, because in our regulation system, larger urban population means you can have larger size of urban land. And then in a monopolized land market, the local government can make more money out of it. This is what we call land finance. Basically, they can sell the using right of land and make a lot of money, and then they can use this money to achieve their political ambitions, to build more infrastructure, to provide better facilities for local residents, to provide more job opportunities, all these kind of stuff. So anyway, the first steps, they need money, they need land finance. That's why they are so enthusiastic to make the urbanization rate as high as possible, because this means they can sell more land. Okay, why land expansion is so important? This is a very complex story, I have to say that, but I try to make it simple to be understood. Well, the local land finance system has been there for decades in China. And it has a lot to do with the tax reform happened in the middle 1990s. I believe many of you have known that in the 1990s, in China, a very fundamental reform happened. Basically, the reform have created changes that the central government more have acquired more tax, have got more control of the country by collecting more tax from the locals. So this has results into a very severe local deficit. But the local government has a lot of responsibilities to fulfill, so they have to work out by themselves how to collect money. And another change during this period is that China has conducted market reform of land at this moment. And the local government find, well, it's a good business. I can sell land. This can respond. This can solve my problem of local deficit. This can help me with the money. I can fulfill the responsibilities to give better welfare of local people. So they find it is a great explicit incentive for the local government. And also, on the other hand, there is indeed substantive demand for new land, because the urbanization rate, as we have seen in previous slides, that China has been gone through a super fast urbanization process, right? It's way higher than than Asia, which is higher than the world average. So urbanization has been increased so fast. Every year there are 14 million and even more people flooding into cities, and they have a very, very strong demand for new land. So this need for land has well supported the land transactions. And the last one is implicit incentive. Actually, various local governments in China has been competing with each other. They're basically, according to some scholars, they're selling their city, they're branding their city. They're trying to make the land in their city more expensive. Actually, there is what we call tournament of local government has been there. So everyone wants to perform better, to show to their leaders, we are a better governor. And then they, with better performance, they might get promoted very, very quickly. So a hidden or implicit incentives also here to trigger the land finance. Okay, so this is how various parts connected. The market reform of land sales solved the problem of local deficit, and the very fast urbanization created a lot of need for the new land, support a strong and prosperous land market, and the hidden mechanism of tournament between local governments has enforced such a process. So I think with this figure, you can understand how land finance systems works, which relate to urbanization. So why people, local governors are so enthusiastic about higher urbanization rate, because it relates to how much money they can collect out of land, because it relates to their political performance, which further influence their promotion. All right. So we're now going back to government-driven urbanization. So how do we define it? Actually, in contrast to the natural migration process of urbanization, government-driven urbanization refers to the process of forcing farmers to migrate into urban areas. So the opposite side of government-driven urbanization is what we can call natural process of urbanization. And this government-driven urbanization can accelerate the pace of urbanization for sure. That's why local government has been has done a lot to improve the level of urbanization. And also here by these efforts of local governments, statistically, a lot more residents are accounted as urban population. So you can see from the figure, at least, the urbanization rate has been increasing in a very fast speed. But actually, these people didn't experience the process, the comprehensive transition of urbanization, which includes, for example, they don't really have improvement of working skills, which is harmful for them to get new jobs in cities. And also, some of them, the lifestyle didn't change at all. They just changed their hukou registration. They might still work in the fields, by looking at them, you won't call them urban residents. You will call them farmers. So lifestyle that didn't change. And also the job types, they're still doing agricultural work. So all extra and extra. So they haven't experienced such a comprehensive transitional process, but they just change their Google registration. They are identified in the statistics as urban residents. So apparently this is not a natural process, right? And by the government-driven urbanization mainly have three types of institutional tools to achieve such a goal. And we have listed here. First one is expropriation of agricultural land. So transforming the agricultural land into urban land. And also sometimes there are administrative adjustment, city-county merges, or creation of cities. So actually, I have some figures here to share with you as well. For example, the number of cities in China is 233 in 1981, and now it's 668. So it's about more than 3 times. And of course, there are a lot of natural growth of the number of cities, but you can't deny that some of them are resulted from this government intervention. It's not fully natural process, but a manipulated process. And also, more figures is that the urban area in 1982 is about 24.8 248,000 square kilometers, and the figure changed into 2,200 square kilometers in 2017. So you can see it's about almost 10 times of urban expansion. So you can see not only the number of cities, but also the expansion of the land has been changing very fast. Okay, so our research contribution by trying to figure out what a government-led urbanization is, we're going to contribute to POTS research by an in-depth discussion whether or not the positive relationship between urbanization and economic growth remains stable in the context of urban-driven urbanization. Because as we have known that POTS research has proved that a normal market-based urbanization is positive to economic growth. Then what about government-driven urbanization? And also, over-urbanization is a phenomenon happening in many countries, not only in China. This research is expected to enrich the literature on over-urbanization by arguing that government-driven urbanization is a particular reason of over-urbanization. And last but not least, we're going to enrich the literature on government-led urbanization or state-led urbanization, which also happened in many Asian countries. So by putting a urbanization goal in formal policy is not only happened in China, but also happened in a lot of Asian countries. For example, in India, they have this kind of urbanization goal as well. Okay, I've spent a lot of time in the introductory section because I think these contextual information will help us to better understand the whole story. So since this section is about research design theories and how do we estimate key parameters, I'll accelerate a little bit. Okay, theoretical background. We employ the pull and push model, which is a classical model for studying urbanization, as the basis in the analysis of driving forces of urbanization. And on top of that, we categorize three different layers of urbanization. So let's first talk about this traditional classical push and pull factors. So why urbanization happens? There are many reasons, of course. The first important one is there is a gap between urban and rural wages. So people move into cities to guide for higher salary. That's the fundamental motivation for rural urban migration. And the second reason is a second push factor is for better utilities, for better amenities. For example, many people are moving into cities because their children can get better education there. The aging people can get better medical health there. And the third reason is rural poverty. They want to get rid of the rural poverty. So on the contrary, we see pooling factors on the right side, which is comparable to the pushing factors. For example, the rising industrial productivity. That's why they can get higher salary. And the quality of urban amenities. And more importantly, the urban bias of government policies. So in many countries, urban policy are more in favor of urban residents. So all these kind of factors we are accounted as market-driven urbanization or market-based policy-driven urbanization. And there are heterogeneous effects of urbanization on economic growth. As we have mentioned that many mechanism has been studied, has been explored, how urbanization can influence economic growth. First of all, urbanization can decrease transportation cost by bringing firms, suppliers, consumers, and closer together. So density here is important. And secondly, cities create thick labor markets. And the third one is larger labor pools in urban areas can lower the match cost. So transaction cost is lower. And fourth one is spillover effects. So these four factors has been well proved to trigger economic growth in past research. And what we want to emphasize here is that the relationship between urbanization and economic growth might be non-linear. It's not always linear. Sometimes it's non-linear. The non-linear relationship between urbanization and economic growth is reflected in a lot of research under the topic of over-urbanization. So one typical example is, for example, in some Latin American countries, more people have moving into cities. Well, they cannot find jobs. They cannot find an appropriate place to live, which further lead to a lot of slums, which is not very healthy for the society. And the third one is government in developing countries are more inclined to promote population urbanization through government policy. For example, in Thailand and in India, They have created many resources, special resources for urban development, because in the opinion of their decision makers, they believe that cities are better for their country's competitiveness in regional rivalry. So that is the basic ideology of these countries, why they have better policy or more advantages has been given to cities. Okay, so the key hypothesis of this research, we argue that government-driven urbanization is a major factor to weaken the growth effect of urbanization. So government urbanization by the analysis we have made in the previous slides, that it is not a natural comprehensive process of transition. It doesn't mean that people are skillful enough on the one hand to support the urban labor market, and on the other hand, they're not qualified consumers of the cities. They're not rich enough because they cannot really earn a very satisfied salary. So on both the demand and supply side, they cannot play a role of a normal urbanization play. So that's why we made this key hypothesis here. So government-driven urbanization is a major factor to weaken the growth effect of urbanization. And there are, why will this happen? First of all, government-driven urbanization may obstruct the mechanism through which urbanization promotes economic growth. So as I've mentioned, there are two mechanisms. The first one is providing qualified labor for manufacturing and other service industries. So government-driven urbanization cannot make this happen. And mechanism number two is increasing demand for industrial goods and services. So they're not qualified consumers. And secondly, government-driven urbanization has created a considerable amount of passive migrants. So it's not their own choice. They have been made to become urban residents, to move into cities, and because of the policy. So appropriate patterns of urbanization needs to be based on social and environmental considerations. Apparently, government-led urbanization doesn't belong to this type. And secondly, when policy does not take these social and environmental factors into consideration, the influx of new urban migrants does not necessarily contribute to economic growth. Okay, then the third part, method and data. Actually, it's very difficult to test the government-led urbanization due to the following reasons. Now, first of all, there are no data, no statistical data regarding how many farmers were forced to migrate. It's a mixture. We can have data of how many people in total migrate into cities, but we cannot separate the part of government-driven urbanization. So this is the first reason, no data. And secondly, it's difficult to find a proxy variable for government-driven urbanization. And we used to think maybe we can use the land sale data. Land sale data in China is available, but the relationship between land sales and the extent of agricultural land expropriation and rural to urban migration is ambiguous. which makes it not possible to use the land sales data anymore. So we do have difficulties in measuring the urban-led, the government-led urbanization. That's the difficulty we are facing. And as a response, this paper proposes a method to realize its research objective. First of all, on the basis of existing literature, we divide urbanization into three parts. So urbanization driven by market forces, which relate to wage disparity between urban and rural. And the second one is urbanization driven by market-based policies. It relates to amenities disparities between urban and rural areas, for example, educational and medical care. And the third part of urbanization, third layer of urbanization is government-driven urbanization. It doesn't have anything to do with the natural process, the market power, but it is driven by government policies. And on the basis of this categorization, our study uses the residual, which has excluded the parts driven by basically individual incentives from urbanization, right? So the first two parts are excluded. Then we think we can use the residual to get the proxy of government-driven urbanization. And actually, these three layers of urbanization have different mechanisms which relate to the government policies. And for the first two types, there are usually no fluctuations with the change of officials. And for government-driven urbanization, it has a lot to do with policies, and further have a lot to do with we use political turnover, so to indicate the policy change with relate to government-led urbanization. So change of its political turnover and the impact of political turnover has a strong persistent feature on urbanization. And to be more specific, we take the year when a new cadre takes office as the breakpoint to test the rationality of the residual as a proxy variable for government-driven urbanization. And we test if the residual has a similar characteristics with government-driven urbanization by two channels. The first one is the path independence of self-change. And the second is the persistence of officials' turnovers influence. All right, and so based on the idea we created in the last slide, we introduces the interaction term of local governors' inflows and the government-driven urbanization to help detect and describe government-driven urbanization's dynamic impact on economic growth. So this interval has been introduced. And also we examine how urbanization, government-driven urbanization and economic growth interact by observing changing coefficients of the interaction terms. Okay, here are the variables we're using for the turnover of local governors. Here we have the two types, the provincial governors and the provincial party secretaries. And provincial governors are mainly in charge of the economic affairs. And the party secretary are mainly responsible for appointing personnel appointment and implementing fundamental policies. And the data regarding to the turnover of local governors are obtained from the Central People's Government site and the People's site. And we use the data regarding political turnover of chief governors for all the 31 province level regions between 1996 and 2015. And the other variables here listed in this figure includes the urbanization rate, GDP per capita, urban-rural income disparity, and so forth. And these data can be acquired from the statistic yearbook of China. And the descriptive statistics has been shown in this table too. Well, the inflows of chief governors has been shown here. As we can see, a total of 113 chief governors, including 41 governors and 72 secretaries, were moved to other provinces in our research period. And we consider this sufficient amount of data for a significant estimation. As we can see in figure 1, only Shanghai exhibited no inflow of chief governors, but all the other province level regions have inflows of chief governors. So the first question is, did China experience urbanization without growth? Or what do we call the terminology a lot of scholars use, over-urbanization? According to figure 6, which provides scatter plots of urbanization rates and economic growth rates, we can see that there are significant differences existed between different provinces. Whereas some, such as Beijing and Guangdong, exhibit a positive relationship between urbanization rate and economic growth. So, while others show attributes of urbanization without growth, a lot of provinces such as Anhui, Shandong, Ningxia, Shanxi, etc., even exhibit negative relationship between urbanization and economic growth. So it seems that over-urbanization has become a typical phenomenon in China as well, like many other developing countries. Okay, in the fourth part, I will explain to you the estimation results and some of the explanation and discussion. Well, first of all, we have established a benchmark model. This model is used to generate different aspects of urbanization, actually, as we mentioned before, the three different parts of urbanization. So in this benchmark model, I represents a region, the provincial level region, and T represents time interval. And here it represents 1 year. And U represents urbanization rate. I for a disparity of wages, income, and E for educational care, and M for medical services. So we can see that in this equation, factors relate to income actually represents the first level urbanization. And factors relate to amenities, so E and M here, relate to the second layer of urbanization. And the residual represents for the government-led urbanization. So the benchmark model is used to generate different aspects, the three different aspects of urbanization. And estimate these dynamic panel models using the Arellano-Bond GMM estimator. Okay, here are the estimation results. We choose the first order lagged value of all independent variables as instrument variables. And here are the how the different urbanization has been separated. So we call the first level urbanization with U0. And the second level urbanization driven by the market-based policy, we call it a U1. And the third level urbanization driven by the rest of the factors, which government-driven urbanization is also included, is represented by the residual. And table 3 have from model 1 to model 3 is the estimation results of how urbanization has been influenced by the first order likely value of these variables. The following up question is, do government policy affect urbanization? So in this model, we add the political turnover of chief governors as our independent variable in order to test whether the residual of the benchmark model shares the same attributes with the government-driven urbanization. So here, inflow is a dummy variable. It is 1 when any chief governor moves from another province in a certain year. And it is 0 otherwise. And we introduce inflow at year T, and it's a lagged value for 3 orders. And to capture the dynamic behaviors of a chief governor facing a new administrative circumstances. So when he moved into a new provincial level region, how does he adapt? And when will he start his own new policy? So the inflow at year T and its select value are expected to reflect these information. And according to the different value of J, actually it's either 0 or 1 or 2. So equal 2 generates another 3 models. Okay, then this is the result for the estimation of these 3 models. And we explain these results. So what has been shown in table 4, the political turnover's influence on urbanization. Well, we explain these results by suggesting that a new chief governor would not necessarily execute their own administrative program immediately because they need time to adapt. So even if they want to, for example, duplicate their successful experiences in other provinces where they worked, this might happen because each province has 2 chief governors, and sometimes they're designed to counter with each other to make it a balanced decision-making process. And another reason is that in each province, there are a group of very powerful middle-level officers. And when a new leader comes in, these middle-level officers, well, they will hesitate. They will think about, normally they will think for a while before they have decided to be very faithful to this new governor. So at least not right away to choose to obey what has been determined by the new governor. So therefore, because of these two reasons, in the early years of the new chief governor's administration, they would aim to coordinate their activities with their counterpart on the one hand, and gain a following among the middle-level officers on the other. So these efforts consume time and energy and slow the implementation of policy. So that's why what we can see in the table 4, the impact of the significance and the coefficients of the term AR1 fall sharply from U0 to U1, U2. And that's also why the impact of new chief governor's arrival on urbanization varies from time, right? It is negative in the first 2 years because basically the new governors, they cannot do much. They need time to adapt. But for U1 and U2, the impact is negative in the first 2 years and then becoming positive in the last year, which means after 2 years of adaptation, they have the new governors have been well dealt with the two factors we have been mentioning. For example, he might become friends with his partner, the secretary of the party, and he gets to know better of the middle level powerful officials, or the middle level officials have determined that, well, this is a well-reputed, a powerful leader. We have to be faithful. We need to carry out his new policies, something like that. So after being stable for a while, 1 year or 2 years, the new governor could be aggressive again in the third year, which somehow explains the estimation results of table 4. So we say that the residual of benchmark model can be used as the appropriate proxy variables of the government urbanization. Okay, the next question is, does government-driven urbanization spur economic growth? Well, here we follow Mukand and Roderick, and I assume, well, here actually the key question here is whether the urbanization has positive effects or negative effects on economic growth. Well, we have this equation number 3. On the left side, it represents actually the GDP growth rate. Then the controlling variables include the capital, physical capital, and human resources, capital, and the urbanization rate. And we also have the internal interval item of government inflow and urbanization. And again here, J represents from number 1 to number 3. So we have another 3 models here. Well, here is the estimation results of equation number 3. So here the coefficients of the controlling variable, the physical capital, the human capital, they have proved a significant positive effect on economic growth, as economic theory tells us. And also the coefficients of the interactive terms change from positive to negative values, which actually informs us that the new chief governors implement more aggressive policies to stimulate urbanization after the first 1 year or 2 years adaptive period. So after they feel they're getting used to the local situation, they're get acquainted with local governors, then they start to conduct their aggressive new policies related to urbanization. And since that moment, that the policies start to create harmful effects on economic growth. Okay, and a following up question will be, is government-driven urbanization always harmful? Does it has anything to do with space, for example? Because here we care about the inflow of governors, but does it matter where the governors comes from? Will there be any difference if the governor inflow is from a neighbor province or non-neighbor province? Okay, so here we follow Mukand and assume that two neighboring regions are more similar to one another than they are to faraway regions. So the situations of neighbor provinces are similar. So the effects of policy duplication depend on whether or not these policies can be adapted to local circumstances. So when chief governors move provinces, they tend to duplicate urbanization policies as well. As some scholars, for example, has demonstrated that leadership transfer networks channel performance innovation between locations which leaders have served. So there are many research like that. So the present study hypothesis that duplicate urbanization policy effects on economic growth depend on the degree similarity. So to what degree these regions have similar context and situation. And the former is equal to 1 if the new governor moved from adjacent province. And the latter equal to 1 if the new governor moved from a non-adjacent province. Okay, that is the explanation for the interactive item of neighbor and urbanization, the non-neighbor and urbanization main here. Okay, this is the estimation results for the whether the special effects exist in governor inflow. Well, according to the estimation results, we see mainly two findings. The first one is in new chief governor's first years in office, government policies which aim to stimulate urbanization could improve economic growth. And the reason we have explained, right? It needs time to get to be adaptive, and their positive effects last longer then they met if they were duplicated from non-adjacent provinces, because they are adjacent neighbor provinces are more similar to each other with related to their context. And on the other hand, government policies to stimulate urbanization that are implemented by a new chief governor would neither improve nor hurt economic growth when governor in question comes from adjacent province, because they are similar. They can be the previous policy they used in other provinces have a very large opportunity to be adaptive to local situations. However, if it is from a non-adjacent province, then negative effects emerge because the direct urban policies lead to worse outcomes in these cases than indirect policies. Okay. Last, I will give a brief summary of this research by closing with a conclusion and public policy implications. Well, actually, this study, we defined the government-driven urbanization and proposed a method to find a proxy variable of to represent government-driven urbanization. And we care about the effects of government-driven urbanization on economic growth, which hasn't been made clear in past research. According to our analysis, the government-driven urbanization is harmful to economic growth, especially when these policies do not suit local social, economic, and cultural circumstances. So based on these research findings, we have two policy implications. Actually, these implications are not only for China, but also for those mostly developing countries where they also emphasize a lot in their policy about urbanization. So the first is the government should strive to provide better public services and infrastructures to attract farmers to urban areas rather than to force them to migrate into urban areas directly. So this basically gives two layers of information. The first one is it's possible, and sometimes it's beneficial for the government to intervene the urbanization process. And the second layer of information, but the intervention has to be conducted in appropriate way, which means either it is based on market-driven policy, or the other is trying to better facilitate the process by providing more and improved infrastructure. And the second policy information is government should try to avoid setting improved urbanization rates in and of themselves as an immediate policy goal. So China has done a lot, as many other developing countries as well, to better support the urbanization process. But according to our research, some of these policy measures should be encouraged and even enhanced, while some others, in particular, the part which is government-driven, which doesn't really create substantive transition of the migrants, should be avoided. Otherwise, it will be a waste of public money and resources. Okay, I think that's all for my part. The last one is some limitations here. Of course, we feel this research is very, very difficult, actually. And during the submission, the revision process, we have discussed a lot of issues with the reviewers as well. And the key flaw of this research, in our opinion, is the measurement of government-driven urbanization. On the one hand, it's a highlight of the research, but on the other hand, it's also the most difficult part because the current measurement is indirect and inaccurate. So it is difficult, if not possible, to precisely give the readers, the audience, the special and other in-depth features of such a important terminology. So currently, it's like a black box. So we will suggest a future study to focus on setting up a macro level database based on a large scale social survey. So maybe we can design some questions to check with the new urban residents whether it's a natural process or it's driven by the government policy. So it's possible to get it in this way to collect more accurate data. And also with relate to the method, for example, the DID model, maybe some other models could better explore the causal relationship between government-driven urbanization and the family income, employment, education, and other variables. Okay, that's all for my part. Thank you.